Målfrid Braut-Hegghammer is an associate professor of political science at the University of Oslo. She's also the author of this new book, Unclear Physics, Why Iraq and Libya Failed to Build Nuclear Weapons. Målfrid, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let me, before we dive into the topic, I want to do a little behind the scenes about the writing of the book. Reading notes about the book, it says you were able to write this book because you had new access to documents that previously were unavailable. Tell us about that. What was available to you?
Well, let me start by saying that the beginning of the book was when I went to Libya and did field work back in 2005 and 2006. And when I spoke to Libyan officials and later on to Iraqi scientists, I realized that much of what I thought about these programs was actually mistaken. And the challenge I faced was, well, the interviews are one thing, but I need documents to really prove my case. And I had to wait quite a few years before I found those documents. And I found those documents in the IAEA archives, which was a real discovery for me. And
they had been available, but you just didn't know they were there?
They were not available to scholars.
Aha, okay. Yeah. So that's a recent release, availability to scholars.
Absolutely.
Give us an example of one of those things that you were assuming about the programs that you found out were much different than the assumptions.
I had assumed that these programs were much more top-driven and that they were perhaps more micromanaged. Considering the kind of leaders that Saddam and Gaddafi were, I thought that they would terrorize their scientists and try to interfere much more. And what I found in both speaking to the scientists and in looking at these documents, which were sort of contemporary descriptions of these programs, I realized that actually things were much more chaotic than I had realized, and that the leaders, first of all, knew much less about the programs than I thought they did, and also that, for the most part, they did not really interfere with the scientists and their work.
Mm-hmm. And so commonality between the two countries, more things in common in the way they approach this than different?
Quite a few things in common, including this lack of oversight for the most part and lack of interference by the two leaders. There were also some important differences, the main difference being that Gaddafi set out to really destroy the state, to sort of weaken state institutions. And that meant that he had much greater problems. He faced greater difficulties when he tried eventually to fix some of the problems that faced the Libyan nuclear program. And Saddam had a bloated state, but still he had a lot more to work with when he tried to sort of figure out what was going on in the program belatedly and try to set it straight.
Is there a common list of reasons for failure?
There are many lists and reasons for failure in these two cases, but what I argue in my book is that one part of this picture is state capacity and the fact that these two leaders weakened their states in order to strengthen their own hold on power. That had a lot of negative consequences for how their states fared when they tried to set up and manage complex programs like the nuclear weapons programs.
How does that manifest in practice? Are the shortcomings, the weakness of the state a matter of budget available or attracting scientists to the projects? How did it actually play out?
So in both cases, they had a lot of money and could attract scientists from abroad as well as...
So both of my guesses were off.
No, they're good guesses. But I think one way in which the state capacity issue manifested itself was the fact that scientists, for example, wouldn't report to Saddam when they were facing delays in the program, massive delays. Partly it was fear and partly they got away with it because what they would do was either not say anything at all or give a very complex technical description that no normal non-scientist would be able to make much sense of. And so they really got away with missing major deadlines, and that's quite surprising in a regime like Saddam Hussein's Iraq. And in Libya, there are some really striking examples where, for example, foreign scientists would go on strike to get better salaries and managed to get, better salaries. Some of the Libyan scientists didn't show up for work because the commute was kind of far and they took other jobs to get more money.
That sounds strikingly informal, not showing up because the commute is too far.
Absolutely, and it did surprise me that in Gaddafi's Libya, which was a very, it was a terrible regime in many respects, people got away with this.
Well, these authoritarian figures allowed tardiness from their scientists on their nuclear program. It's stunning.
It is, and I think they didn't really realize what was happening.
So the lack of oversight, it's almost an argument for a stronger bureaucracy, where more checks and balances or more accountability is part of the equation.
I suppose if you're a dictator and you want nuclear weapons, it's good to have strong state institutions, and it's also good to let your scientists work at their own pace and not interfere too much.
Speaking of authoritarian leaders who want nuclear weapons, we have one in North Korea who's succeeding. In thinking about what you discovered in Libya and in Iraq, what are they doing differently in North Korea that is working?
Well, I think in North Korea they have had much more time. And what I argue in my book is that the Iraqi program would have succeeded if the '91 Gulf War had not happened. The Iraqis would probably have had a nuclear weapons capability by the mid to late '90s. Now in North Korea, the program has sort of stopped and restarted several times, but they've had more time, and even if the program has not been perfectly managed, it's been adequately managed, and here we are, and they have made major breakthroughs.
For those in the business of non-proliferation, what are the most important lessons to take away from your study?
I think the main lesson is that we have to take this threat seriously, that even personalist leaders can succeed if they have, enough time, but also if they leave their state institutions alone. There's been a tendency before North Korea to sort of discount this threat and say, well, they just mess up their programs and we shouldn't really worry about this. And I think the case of Iraq demonstrates clearly that they can succeed unless they make major mistakes like invading another country, and North Korea certainly proves that point.
Are there any other so-called potential nuclear hotspots that you're keeping an eye on in this regard?
Several, very different countries from Iraq and Libya though, but South Korea and Japan are high up on the list of countries that people are worrying about because they may have strong incentives these days to consider getting a nuclear weapons option of their own.
The shared strong incentive, North Korea itself.
Absolutely.
And I'm guessing you think that would be a bad idea.
I think it's destabilizing. More countries with nuclear weapons, especially countries that have difficult relationships, is an added danger.
For people who fear those outcomes of a larger club of nuclear states, your book is hopeful because it shows that it's not as easy as it might appear, even if you have leaders or groups that are highly motivated. But with what's happening on the Korean Peninsula, do you fear that there may be a new wave of nuclearization?
There may be a new wave, and it's taking place at a time when we see a nuclear arms race already between India and Pakistan, for example. And there are indications that the global non-proliferation regime is eroding or being weakened. So I think there are many reasons to take these risks quite seriously.
What needs to be done to strengthen that non-proliferation regime globally?
It is very important that the US demonstrates continued leadership. A lot of countries worry that the US perhaps will not remain as committed to non-proliferation and arms control under the current administration. I think it's important that the US and all countries that want to make sure that other countries do not acquire nuclear weapons, that we work together against this threat.
Målfrid, thank you. This is clearly important work, and thanks for shedding some light on it, something that even if you're not thinking about it, perhaps you should be.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wish you great success with the book. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Thank you.